Yep. Is the Awesemo lineup building show, the top stacks version. Matt Savoca and I going through some of the top stacks and the tools over on Awesemo.com and using that with some of the tools over at Fantasy Cruncher to build some lineups and kind of reacting to what gets spit out for us. So I like this. I think it's a good way to start my process for the week and just get an idea of some of the players I might be on. The show is sponsored by Jock Market. Do us a favor as you're coming in. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Does us a whole lot of good. Matt, how you feeling about this week of football? We're starting to get some COVID cases, not quite the NBA situation, but it's certainly being impactful.
Yeah, I feel for you guys over on the NBA side this week, but it's been pretty much the same story on the NFL side. It's been wild. Basically, since Monday, we've seen the most COVID cases in the league, more cases this week than the entire rest of the season combined. So trying to make sense of it. We got some good options nonetheless on this slate. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see some of the value plays that pop up in also coordination with some of the stacks we're getting to. And I did want to make this maybe a little bit different than some of the other ones we've done in terms of I also want to look at some really lower owned stacks that we do have projecting as being fairly under owned with potential for upside. And that's actually where we'll start is over on DraftKings. One team that does look pretty good in the top stacks tool, it's the San Francisco 49ers. We've got Deebo Samuel. He's healthy now. He's kind of less of a receiver now and more of a running back / wide receiver. Kind of plays the same position as Cordell Patterson, actually, to be honest. We do have the San Francisco 49ers on DraftKings this week. 4.5% projected ownership going to Jimmy Garoppolo, but a 7.7% chance for this team to be a top stack. They are cheap, so it's going to be pretty easy to kind of fit in Garoppolo as receivers and whoever else we want to get to. What do you think of the 49ers as a stacking option on DraftKings this weekend?
I think it's really, really intriguing because the weakest spot, if you will, the part that feels hardest to trust is actually Jimmy Garoppolo. I have no problem getting to Deebo Samuel, who's having a complete breakout season. You said it. They don't really care how they're getting him touches. They're just getting him touches. So the utilization for Samuel overall has been there consistently. And then you talk about George Kittle just absolutely destroying souls of late. I think he has 340 plus yards over his last 4 games, with 50+% of it after the catch. So I'm fine going to Deebo or Kittle or both if we can fit it, especially when their quarterback is low salary and the matchup against Atlanta looks good.
If I'm not mistaken, there's been something like 3 of the top 15 PPR games of all time from tight ends have come in the last 3 weeks. And George Kittle has been right in that mix. Just 2 weeks ago, George Kittle, 9 catches for 181 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then he follows it up last week, 13 catches for 151 yards and a touchdown. And then you have that massive performance out of Travis Kelce. So tight end ones, they are back and roaring and ready to go. So let's start making some of these 49ers stacks in Fantasy Cruncher now. And we're going to do this on DK. Then we'll make a FanDuel stack after this. So Mike, if you could pull up Fantasy Cruncher, we'll start working on these. Make sure you have the right slate selected, just because we have, the Saturday games this week. We have the Thursday games. Big week for NFL in terms of spread out games. So make sure that we have the main slate selected, the 1 p.m. 11 game slate on Sunday. And then we're going to lock in Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. And when we start to go to some of the stack settings and position stacks here, are you looking to make double stacks with Jimmy Garoppolo and his receivers, or just a single stack this weekend?
I think I would be okay with a single stack. I don't think I would force it. I think I'd be okay with just one receiver.
Okay, so we'll go Jimmy Garoppolo with at least one wide receiver tight end, and then the matchup for the 49ers going up against the Atlanta Falcons. How do you feel about getting a run back option from the Falcons against this 49ers defense?
Yeah, I think you could do it, especially with San Francisco still dealing with injuries in the secondary. So I know the receiving options haven't been spectacular for Atlanta, but I think I would force a run back here as we're building them out.
Okay. And then as you're doing this, Mike, make sure we have running backs selected too from the opposing team, because Cordell Patterson's listed as a running back. And is he really a running back ish? He's kind of a little bit of everything. He's played a couple snaps or at least he's on the depth chart as a safety this year. He's played a lot of running back, wide receiver. So getting a little bit of everything from Cordell Patterson. So make sure we have him set. And then I didn't see, did you lock in Jimmy Garoppolo already, Mike? Okay, cool. So then just make sure we have the randomness set to 30%. And then we could build 50 lineups and see what pops up. So just, how I like to ask you this, Matt, when we run these lineups, who do you think is going to appear most commonly with Jimmy Garoppolo, Deebo Samuel or George Kittle?
I think it's going to be Kittle. I think it's going to be Kittle, then Samuel, and then Brandon Ayuk, if I had to guess.
So my guess is going to be Deebo, just because our projection has been so high on this year. I think he's one of the players that we've hit on the most in our projections, because there was a lot of times early in the year where it's like, really, Deebo Samuel, when his price was slowly starting to come, it's like, I don't know if I want to get to. We had him projected so high so many weeks that I think that's something that really benefited me. So I'm going to say Deebo Samuel just from that perspective. But Mike, show us the results. Let's see who we ended up getting to here. It is George Kittle, slightly ahead of Deebo Samuel. So we do have Kittle, then Samuel, still pretty close, though. So they're pretty clearly the 1 and 2 options. Let's see who else ended up popping up here. Could you scroll through wide receivers? I'm curious to see.
I kind of like that first lineup.
Yeah, first lineup is Jimmy Garoppolo, James Robinson. By the way, what's ridiculous about this week is just the amount of players that have questionable tags. Just scrolling through it, it's just inevitable at this point of the season. You go through and you've got that the injury logo popping up next to a whole bunch of players. So it's certainly going to be a situation you guys are going to want to make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel and watching all the other content we have this week, especially live before lock on Sunday, just where we get the most updated information. The other thing too is, who knows when some of these guys are going to get ruled out or end up in COVID protocols, which could change stuff pretty significantly. We are getting to James Robinson quite a bunch right here in this build. My assumption is that he's ultimately not going to play. Do you have a lean with James Robinson?
Yeah, I thought he was going to play. So my thought was with the way that Darrell Bevell, interim head coach for the Jaguars, which, by the way, thank goodness they got rid of Urban Meyer. I thought he was talking about James Robinson like he was going to play. If he does, I think he's a lock button. But if he doesn't, man, what do you do with that backfield? Because Hyde has already been ruled out.
Yeah, so that's going to be something else that's kind of interesting. I do think there's going to be value in the Jaguars backfield. I'm just not sure which guy it's going to be. Something else that's kind of funny to me, it sticks out. Mike, click on the running back tab again really quick. Everybody's hurt. Look at that. Everybody's hurt that pops up there. It's so many guys with injury listings that are on the injury report. So it's stuff that we're certainly going to need to get cleared up. We have DeAndre Swift in the projections right now. I ultimately assume that he is not going to play this week. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, I don't think he's playing this week. The Lions don't have any reason to risk it with him. I'm looking at this. I almost wonder if the best thing we could do, especially if we're trying to build out San Francisco stacks, is give a boost to Cordero Patterson specifically. But yeah, look at this running back core. Is this the worst running back main slate like ever? It's terrible.
So, I mean, it's not the best one, and it's one of those things that certainly does pop up as you just look at the overall options that we have on the slate, and then also you just run the lineups in Fantasy Cruncher as we're doing this. And this is something I like about doing the show with you is both this show and the show I'll be doing tomorrow with Neil Orfield is I kind of figure out some of the guys that I think I might want to get on just based on talking through some of these situations. You look at the pricing, we've got Najee Harris is the most expensive running back this week. Then it's Zeke, then it's Joe Mixon. Then you get to Cordero Patterson. Cordero Patterson is the fourth most expensive running back on the slate. So we'll see where some of this ends up in terms of these guys going to roll out. There could just be a mass amount of value that opens up at running back, and then we'll just pay up for Cooper Kupp and all the wide receivers. But can you click on the wide receiver tab really quick, Mike? I'm curious to see. Yes, we're still getting to a ton of Cooper Kupp in this build, which makes sense. The 49ers are not a difficult team to find salary to pay up for because, we've got Jimmy Garoppolo, fairly cheap quarterback, running backs are cheap. Just looking at this, do you think that you're going to be paying up for wide receiver a good amount this week?
Oh man, I just was talking on the Contrary show about how I might be joining Team Jam 'em in, but with wide receivers this week. Why not get to Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel, or Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams if you can swing it, or swing down to Deontay Johnson if you have to? Absolutely going to be paying up at wide receiver this week.
Yeah, and I kind of think it's inevitable. It just looks like we're going to end up with so much value at running back. There is not an obvious running back to pay up for. There's Najee Harris, but I'm not dying to pay up for an inefficient Najee Harris. So just kind of an interesting way to look at it. I do think that the 49ers stacks are a pretty interesting team to be overweight to the field to as a contrarian option. But we can move over to FanDuel next, and a team that I like stacking on FanDuel. This one's going to be a lot more popular than the San Francisco 49ers. That is the Los Angeles Rams. And once again, we need to keep an eye on the COVID protocols and who ends up getting ruled in, ruled out for this team. They have a matchup against the Seattle Seahawks coming off a really big win against the Cardinals that really is the Rams back in the division discussion. And if you look at the odds for them over in our top stacks tool, by the way, top stacks tool, free to use over at Awesemo.com. So if you want to check it out and see teams' projected odds being the top scoring team on the slate, we have the Rams this weekend, 20.7% chance on FanDuel to be the top scoring team of the week. The only team even remotely close is the Buffalo Bills at 14.9% chance, but we have them as being overowned. So the Rams, 7.1% ownership going to Matt Stafford, 20.7% chance to be the top scoring stack on the slate. So I'm looking at the Rams, Matt Stafford, Cooper Kupp stacks. I think this is going to be the build that I utilize most often this week. How about for you?
Oh, yeah. Stafford is a definite value because there are going to be so many lineups playing Cooper Kupp without Matt Stafford. And Matt Stafford could easily get there. He just needs to get basically one more player involved here. So I absolutely think that this is a viable option. This is a great spot. And, there could be a lot more information between now and Sunday, but except for Odell Beckham, most of the key absences are on the defensive side of the ball, COVID related, I should say, for the Rams.
Yeah, and that could mean they have to throw the ball more. It could be a situation where they can't rely on, the defense looked so great against the Cardinals last week, and that might not be an option this week, even in a matchup against the Seahawks, which isn't that daunting on paper because the Seahawks have struggled a lot more than expected this year. I do think that Russell Wilson looked better last week. I do think he could have a strong finish to the year. This team is desperate for wins. So I do think this is a potential game that could shoot out, maybe a little more sneaky than what people expect. The game does have a 45.5 point total, which is, fairly low considering most Rams games. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being a shootout, though. And so now we're looking to stack Matthew Stafford. My preference is to make double stacks when we're looking at a pocket patch like Matthew Stafford. You and I have talked about this in previous weeks, but maybe salary could be a little bit of an issue, especially if we're going to be jamming Cooper Kupp in on FanDuel. So are you looking to make one or two force players that we're bringing in with Stafford in lineups?
I'm definitely going to say two here because I worry that if we just say one, we're just going to get something like 98% Cooper Kupp as we run 200 lineups here. So let's definitely throw in two, get a little variation here.
All right. So Mike, bring up the FanDuel page on Fantasy Cruncher, and look at that. He's already ahead of us. He's got Matthew Stafford locked in, and then go over to the position stacks and let's make double stacks. Matthew Stafford with at least two of his wide receiver tight ends from the same team. And then
I think you can make an argument. Sorry, Greg. I think you could make an argument too to add running back to that group as well, because we have seen. I think there's a possibility that Sony Michel or Darrell Henderson, if he's active, will get plenty of dump off passes as the third option with Beckham out.
Okay, I dig it. So let's get the running backs in there, and then let's run it back with at least one of the pass catchers, so wide receiver / tight end from the Seahawks. And that should get us to a fair amount here of Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is officially listed as questionable to play. He's been limited practice. I ultimately assume he ends up playing just because we're just in desperation time for the Seahawks. They need to win out.
Lockett's on the COVID list too. So
I missed that Lockett got added to the COVID list.
Yeah.
So so I'm kind of curious. Let's just run through a scenario. If Lockett and Metcalf are both ruled out, who becomes the value wide receiver for the Seahawks?
I guess you go to Freddie Swain. You also got to take a look at Gerald Everett. I think Gerald Everett, based on his low salary right now, is a viable option at tight end. These aren't super exciting plays. The fact that Alex Collins got ruled out, I don't think Rashad Penny's going to be a pass catcher, but who else is going to catch passes for this team if Metcalf is out?
Yeah, and I mean the other thing too with the Seahawks and what they do, Penny looked pretty good last week. He played a whole bunch, and we've seen what Pete Carroll does with the running back position from time to time. He gets latched onto a guy and just like, hey, we're just giving you the ball a whole bunch of times. Remember how much in the past it would be a thing where he would force the ball to Chris Carson. Chris Carson would fumble, he'd get put in the doghouse, but he'd always give Chris Carson those opportunities. So let's run these lineups, and I'm kind of curious what is going to get spit out here. Although we might still have Odell Beckham in our player pool. So if he's in there, yeah, Mike, if Odell Beckham's in the player pool, just take him out and so that he doesn't pop up. But so I'm going to assume Cooper Kupp is going to be the wide receiver that we see the most stacked to Matthew Stafford. He's going to pop up in the majority of these lineups. Who do you think is going to be the second most popular pass catcher in these stacks with Stafford?
Ooh, I think it might be Tyler Higbee. And not Van Jefferson, but I wouldn't be shocked if Van Jefferson ended up second, but I'll go with Higbee as my guess.
Yeah, I think Higbee is a pretty good guess, especially just because tight end could occasionally be a difficult position to fill. Tyler Higbee was on the COVID list. He has been activated, so that is something that's no longer a concern for him particularly. He's also really cheap on FanDuel, only $5,200. So when you're looking at Stafford being fairly expensive, Cooper Kupp being fairly expensive, I think we just see a whole lot of Tyler Higbee that pops up. But Mike, show us the results. Let's see what happens here. All right, so look at that. Cooper Kupp and Tyler Higbee. Just all of the lineups have Kupp and Higbee. And then as a run back, who's popping up right now? DK Metcalf. So
DK 100 too.
Yeah, so a whole lot of DK Metcalf. And, once again, maybe that's not really that much of a surprise. DK Metcalf is only 6,800 on FanDuel. If we're just assuming he plays as of right now, with, like you said, no Tyler Lockett in the picture, then I think we would have to assume that DK Metcalf is going to be one of the best overall wide receiver plays on FanDuel, no?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. He's pretty much a lock play in cash games. The fact that he's still not practicing has made me a little more concerned than I originally thought this week, but you can't get away from him. His salary is just too low compared to expected opportunity with Lockett out.
All right. And then Mike, do me a favor, just click on the running back tab. I'm curious who else is popping up in the running back here. So once again, a lot of James Robinson, whether he plays or not, that is still up in the air. We got a question about that in the YouTube chat, where was Sterling Tice said, wasn't it stated that he would be the main role talking about James Robinson? If he's healthy, the issue is that he's not totally healthy. If Robinson plays, yes, I totally assume he's going to be the guy for the Jaguars, but it's very much up in the air with his injury situation if he ultimately ends up playing or not this week. As for other guys, Zeke popping up a whole bunch, James Conner. Zeke's an interesting one. I like the matchup he has against the Giants. Zeke has looked all kinds of washed up, but then there's also the injury to Tony Pollard. I was pretty heavy on Zeke last week. It ultimately yielded some pretty disappointing results. How are you going to be handling Elliott this weekend at a pretty cheap price point on FanDuel at 6,700 and a banged up Tony Pollard?
I'm out. I'm out on Ezekiel Elliott. I get it. I completely get it. This is when you're supposed to play running backs, right? As heavy favorites. I believe they're still double-digit favorites. And there's really no healthy competition behind him. But they gave Corey Clement a bunch of touches last week with Tony Pollard sideline, and we do expect Pollard to possibly be back here. Just the efficiency is poor. That's really what it is with Ezekiel Elliott. I named him my fade of the week on the Contrary show, so I'll go elsewhere. You also mentioned injuries all over the place with this running back core. James Conner might not play either, so this crunch will look very different come Sunday morning, most likely.
Yeah, and it's something that's just unavoidable at this point in time in the week. There's so many players that are on the injury report, which is par for the course at this time of the football season. Then you add everything that's happening with COVID. And actually, I will guarantee that there are multiple significant players that are ruled out. I just don't know who it's going to be. So this is certainly just a preliminary look at the slate. And next, we'll look at some other options over an Oddshopper. So Mike, if you queue up Oddshopper, we'll look through that in a second. But first, I want to shout out the sponsor of today's show is Jock Market. And if you guys are unfamiliar with Jock Market, this is a totally different way to play daily fantasy sports. They've basically made a stock market, but for athletes. So different way that you could play DFS. There's an IPO period where you bid on the players and you could buy and sell players, shares of them as the games have already started and going on. So it's a really fun way. Buy low on players, sell high. There's all different ways you could look at it. But one thing you should definitely be doing if you're playing on Jock Market for the first time, download the app, sign up using the promo code Awesemo, get up to a $50 bonus on your first deposit. Really good way to get some value to get started over at Jock Market. So let's pull up Oddshopper next. And just talking about Oddshopper and some of the QBs that individually have good odds of going over their passing yard prop. We did this last week, and we ended up finding ourselves some Seahawks stacks. It actually worked out really well. If it wasn't for a touchdown reception that got called back for DK Metcalf, everybody would have gone off. Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. But overall, I was pretty happy with the contrarian results that we got from Seahawks stacks and Russell Wilson. The quarterback that has the best odds of going over his passing yard total right now is Mike Lennon. I don't want to build giant stacks, though. This is all relative to him having a passing yard total of under 200.
You coward. You absolute coward.
So not sure that he's somebody that I really want to get to. But I am kind of curious to look at some Aaron Rodgers here, who, even though he has the under on his passing yard total, we do have the Green Bay Packers looking like a pretty good stack this week on both FanDuel and DraftKings as a contrarian option. With the Green Bay Packers with 6% ownership share on FanDuel going to Aaron Rodgers, 8.8% chance to be a top stack. Over on DraftKings, only 2.8% projected ownership to Aaron Rodgers going up against the Baltimore Ravens, 9.3% chance to be a top stack. So I do wonder if it's a thing where just in general, people are so low on Aaron Rodgers, and maybe this also correlates to that we have, a fairly low yardage projection towards him. But here's why that doesn't necessarily matter quite as much. Even though we only have Aaron Rodgers projected for about 260 passing yards, we still have him with a 9.3% chance to be the top stack on the slate compared to a 2.8% ownership share on DK. So what do you make of Aaron Rodgers and the Packers as a possible contrarian option?
I think it's a really, really interesting play. And I wonder if this is I don't know what kind of bias you would label this as, but this is a bias based on the fact that we're constantly seeing Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport add updates about this toe and how there's been setbacks. And I think that is tamping down Rodgers' ownership artificially. One thing I might want to do if we're building out stacks here, though, maybe we lock in Rodgers and Adams and then we just see how the optimizer builds around it.
Okay, yeah, and do you want to make these stacks over on DK double stacks with Aaron Rodgers, or are we just going to go Adams, Rodgers, single stack, and just see what else pops up?
Only a double stack if we're going to include the running backs. Alex and I were talking in the previous hour about there's a lot of uncertainty at the running back position right now with the Packers, making the possibility that one of them becomes the hot hand solid GPP option. So that would be the only way I would double stack it.
Okay, so let's just do the single stack with Rodgers and just single stack with Rodgers and Adams. Lock both of them in, and I'm kind of curious then if you had to roster a Packers running back, and obviously nobody makes you. There's no sort of rule that every week you have to roster AJ Dillon or Aaron Jones. But if you had to roster one of them, somebody puts a gun to your head and say, "Hey, Matt, if we are," or they put a gun to producer Mike's head and they say, "Here's what's going to happen. You have to tell us who's a better fantasy play, Aaron Jones or AJ Dillon. If you get it wrong, we're kidnapping Mike." Assuming you want to save Mike, who are you picking?
AJ Dillon got 70% of the running back touches over the last 3 games played compared to 30% for Aaron Jones. And even though Aaron Jones got the touchdown, I'm going to go with the opportunity. So AJ Dillon would be my guess.
Okay, so I think that is good information to have. Mike, good luck. So your hopes now lie with AJ Dillon, but that aside, let's build some of these lineups and just kind of curious what pops up. As for running backs for me, I can't do it when we're going up, when we're looking at a Ravens team that in general doesn't necessarily stack all that well, just because you got Lamar Jackson much more run heavy than pass heavy, but then you also got the injury situation with Lamar Jackson. I don't want to get run backs from the Baltimore Ravens on the other side unless you feel really differently.
Yeah, you probably don't want to play 2 running backs from this game, so we'd have to make sure we filter out lineups like this. But Devonta Freeman has had a lot of touches over the last 6 to 8 weeks. And if you look at expected fantasy points, he's actually top 10 among running backs on the slate. So that's one that maybe you could give like a boost to in your projections or a thumbs up to in Fantasy Cruncher, but not necessarily force.
All right, so let's build the lineups. And I can't even ask you the question. We know we're getting to Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams in all the lineups because we locked them in. But aside from that, what are you expecting in terms of salary at other positions? Do you think we're going to get some cheaper? Well, they're probably going to be cheaper running backs because that's all that's at our disposal. But how do you think this impacts Cooper Kupp? Because remember in the other build that we did on ZK, we were getting to all of the Cooper Kupp in our San Francisco 49ers stacks. How do you think locking in Devontae Adams impacts the amount of Cooper Kupp that Fantasy Cruncher will get us to?
Well, first of all, I'm genuinely excited to find out this answer because as we do this exercise, I'm legitimately curious about what this does because Kupp does look like objectively the strongest skill player play on the slate. I think ultimately it's going to bring it down, but I think we'll still see ownership probably in the 60 to 70% range. And I think we'll see a lot of Devontae Parker is my guess as the key value wide receiver option as well.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. So, Mike, show us the results. It's like a game show. I like when the screen rolls back and we see what pops up. So click on that wide receiver tab, and I'm curious to see what we've got. Yeah, so we've still got some not very much Cooper Kupp, though. This build would certainly have us underweight to Cooper Kupp. Obviously, Devontae Adams, you hit the nail on the head with Devontae Parker. You see him popping up in a whole ton of lineups to save salary. DK Metcalf popping up in a bunch of lineups. I think DK Metcalf is going to be inevitable this weekend. I think we have to get exposure to him. Just the situation with the Seahawks need to win games. We've got Tyler Lockett and COVID protocols. Actually, I want to ask you about, we've got Christian Kirk, Rondale Moore showing up there. DeAndre Hopkins, it appears that he's going to be out for the rest of the regular season. They hope to have him back for the playoffs to the Arizona Cardinals. What do you make of Rondale Moore and Christian Kirk? Who do you prefer as a value play in tournaments this weekend?
Gosh, this is tough, but I am going to be getting to both of them. So I wouldn't say I'm making a strong stand. I will say with the running back core beat up this week, especially if there's 2 of them active, but we don't really know, like Chase Edmonds and Eno Benjamin are our only options in the backfield. I might say Rondale Moore, who's been utilized with about 2 rush attempts per game on top of his opportunities in the passing game, could see the biggest boost. I still think that AJ Green is the clear first option to get a boost in target share, however.
Okay. Yeah. And I think one thing that's really hard, and it's something I don't presume that everybody's watching played NBA DFS last night also, but there's a difference between how I evaluate the players and how I would like them to be used versus what the actual reality is. So we had last night in NBA DFS, everybody was super high on Şengün, and I just couldn't project him for more than 20 minutes last night, given how he's been utilized in previous games. I almost feel the same with Rondale Moore. I love Rondale Moore. I love watching him play. They don't throw him the ball that often. When they do, it's a lot of really short screen passes. Does that situation change now that DeAndre Hopkins is out? Perhaps. And I think there's upside for tournaments. I just can't go crazy with Rondale Moore when you consider his lack of usage recently.
I agree. What do they call that? The assumption of rational coaching. Very, very risky thing to do there. So I get it. We've also seen a huge snap share for Christian Kirk. He has an outside chance to lead this team in targets rest of season as well. To be honest, it's just leading me back to Kyler Murray. I think Kyler Murray against the Detroit Lions is as good of a play as you can really get for a high salary quarterback option. Obviously, if you're going to be locking in one or two of these premier wide receivers, that's tough. But maybe just take the guesswork out of it and go with Kyler. You're going to get the points there.
Yep, that's not one of the stacks that we got to here, but just looking over at the top stacks tool and seeing where some of these numbers pop up, do have a 10.1% chance for the Cardinals to be the top scoring stack on DraftKings. That is the third highest on the slate. Over on FanDuel, we have them with a 9.6% chance. So same thing, third best odds. So the only teams ahead of them are the Rams and the Bills. So certainly a team that's going to be in play. But other than that, guys, thank you for watching. Do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You're going to want to get access to all of the football content we have coming up because it's going to change. Guys are going to get ruled out. Guys are going to get ruled in. Who is it going to be? Matt and I are kind of taking guesses at it now, but we'll have a better picture of it over the weekend. I'm doing a tournament show tomorrow. Matt's usually on Live Before Lock on Sunday, so check all that out. Good luck this weekend, guys.